So, by popular demand, and since I did a best missions list last week, today I'm going to go through the worst. Basically, my least favorite missions in the series for all the main entries. That means, once again, excluding the 2D and near 2D games like GTA 1, 2, Advance, and Chinatown Wars. Maybe I'll get to those eventually, but that's for another day. For now, a quick observation. I had actually drafted a script for this idea a long time ago, and came across it while writing this one, but not before writing last week's Best Missions video. Side note, watch that one if you haven't watched it yet, or, watch it immediately after this one. Immediately. Anyways, I had written out my initial thoughts for best and worst missions, and while a lot of my video from last week lined up with this script, some of it did not. Just goes to show there are no right or wrong answers here, and what missions strike me as the best or worst might change depending on a number of things. There are always some, though, on either side that just need to be talked about, like the third way or light my fire. But we'll get to that one later. Before we get started, though, I want to let you know there will be some mild e-begging and a Patreon ad in the middle of the video. If that sounds like something you want to skip, I've included chapters for the video, and I'll show you when to skip to in the video when we get to it. Other than that, thank you for tuning in today, and now let's get into it. Let's start off like we did last time then, with GTA 3, and my first nomination for the worst mission of that particular game is Kingdom Come. Depending on one's perspective though, I could hear arguments for most of GTA 3 missions being the worst in the series, or a great many more than most entries, especially if being played by a newcomer to the series on the original hardware. These games haven't always aged well. GTA 3 in particular, as I mentioned in the last video, is a really hard game. Like, really hard if you aren't using any cheats and don't know the city inside and out, as I happen to. It's really easy for me specifically to forget how cumbersome it is to have to navigate the world in GTA 3 thanks to there being no map in the pause screen, because for me, I've memorized the city's layout. That is not a realistic or fair expectation to put on a player though, and certainly not anymore. So how bad does a mission have to be for somebody like me, who actually loves GTA 3, to be annoyed? Well, this bad. The mission Kingdom Come is given to the player on Staunton Island by King Courtney of the Uptown Yardies. There's an irony here, since I ended up naming one of Courtney's missions in the last video as the best mission of GTA 3, or at least my favorite, Gang Car Roundup, simply because I enjoy those kind of open-ended objectives. Here though, he also lands a potential spot on the worst list because of the last mission in his thread. Kingdom Come sees the player going to a big empty parking lot in Bedford Point. When you arrive and get into the Esperanto the game instructs you to, it's implied that Claude finds a handwritten note inside the vehicle from Catalina. After reading it, 3 vans block the entrances to the parking lot, and an infinite number of new, unique NPC types come spilling out. The spanked up madmen here will run at you with explosives strapped to their chests, and can very easily overwhelm you, especially if you aren't prepared. Now, if you play this mission in the Definitive Edition, you at least can retry when you die, but to my knowledge, there are no actual checkpoints for missions that are this short, meaning you will still have to drive from Liberty Campus to Bedford Point every single time you restart. If you play mostly the original version, like I do, this mission is even more of a nightmare. Dying means having not only to drive from the hospital to Liberty Campus to restart the mission, but also to Ammunition to first restock on ammo, since you're gonna need it. Either that, or you have to reload a save, which is what I usually do to save the time. This is a problem in Vice City, San Andreas to an extent, and really in all the 3D games to varying degrees. However, GTA 3, being the first 3D game in the series, is easily the worst offender, making missions like Kingdom Come go from annoying to downright infuriating. The most effective method I've found for completing this one is to immediately take out the 3 that spawn from each van once the cutscene ends, and then charge at each van as aggressively as you can, checking your back often to make sure none of them sneak up on you, since really, if even one catches you, it's probably over. My next nominee is Bullion Run. This mission is given by D-Ice, and one of the few missions actually given to the player on the 3rd landmass, Shoreside Vale. The mission tasks you with jumping into a vehicle, any vehicle, and collecting a bunch of gold bullion scattered around an intersection in Pike Creek. My next nominee is Rigged to Blow. I had actually originally chosen Bullion Run as my nominee, but then I remembered how much I hate Rigged to Blow. They are both missions given by D-Ice, and some of the only ones that are given on the game's 3rd landmass, Shoreside Vale. The mission asks you to take a car rigged with a bomb and drive it to a bomb shop to have it defused, and then drive it back. What makes it horrible is that you can't touch anything. The slightest nudge will blow your car up, and I know this very well from my last playthrough for GTA 3's Game Vault, which you should watch. This mission is just way too punishing. You have zero margin for error here, and you have to drive across basically the entire map, from the 3rd island to the 1st, and then back to the 3rd. And since this is a mission given in the latter parts of the game, if you haven't made a save recently, you're going to end up losing everything when you do this mission, because I sincerely doubt you're going to complete it on the first try, unless you're a GTA 3 speedrunner. Now, I didn't quite follow the rule as well as I'd hoped to, but in my best missions video, I mentioned that I wanted to mostly only consider missions that have both some kind of interesting story and interesting gameplay. I mean, my very first choice for that video, Gang Car Roundup, really doesn't have any interesting story, so again, I didn't follow my own rules, but this is my channel, deal with it. Anyways, in that vein, while this is definitely not going to be my final choice, I wanted to take a moment to highlight how much I despise GTA 3's paramedic missions. They literally have no story, and aren't super compelling gameplay, especially since you are forced to listen to either the ambience of Liberty City or the sound of your ambulance's annoying siren for about an hour. However, these are missions, and in GTA 3, there's nothing worse than paramedic. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, I'll probably mention it again, but let's just go over how atrocious this is. You have to do 12 levels of paramedic, one additional patient each level, so a total of 78 patients in a row. Unlike taxi missions or vigilante, you can't just deliver a total of 78 patients to the hospital, or only so many on each island. No, you have to do all 12 missions in one go. To make this even harder, your ambulance is an emergency vehicle, meaning you cannot use the pan spray to lose the police, and if you don't drive super carefully, you're going to at least get 1 or 2 stars now and again when you run somebody over, who probably jumped right in front of your ambulance. This also means you can't repair your ambulance. It might not seem like a big deal, but when you have to drive fast, not run over your patients, not run over anybody or smash into any cops so as not to get stars, all at the same time, and you can't repair your vehicle for a straight hour of driving, well, it becomes a big deal. By level 7 or 8, if you aren't driving immaculately, your ambulance is probably already showing white smoke, and odds are, by about level 10 or 11, she's gonna catch fire and blow up. All of this isn't even mentioning how easy it is to roll your ambulance over in GTA 3, since it's such a wobbly, unstable vehicle in terms of weight distribution. And flipping over any vehicle in the 3D era games means a fireball, but here, there's no 30-second window to jump into a new ambulance, like with taxis or vigilante, just instant failure. GTA 3 paramedic side missions, in terms of actual gameplay, should almost certainly take the trophy home tonight for being the actual worst. However, returning to my original rules and trying to actually follow them, it doesn't quite meet my standards, since it literally has no story. Then again, having some of both was really only a logical criteria for the best of list. When discussing worsts, it might actually make more sense to place missions which have horrible gameplay and no story, or, horrible story and no gameplay at all, at the top. That would also be predictable and boring though, so before I make any decisions for GTA 3, let's look at my last nominee. Grand Theft Aero is actually a really interesting and arguably one of the most important story missions in GTA 3. However, thanks to a number of mechanics in this game, which I've already discussed, it is also incredibly frustrating to actually play, if you aren't using cheats or are playing completely blind. This mission is like 90s CRPG levels of brutal to the player in a way that I don't think could be justified even back then. For starters, the mission is long and has you driving all over the goddamn map. First, from Donald Love's building to Francis International Airport, where several NPCs armed with M16s wait to ambush you. Again, thinking about this from the perspective of a new player, it is so insanely easy to get completely nuked here by the M16-wielding Colombians, and this is only the player's first encounter with them on this mission. If you actually manage to survive the first encounter, you next have to drive over to Fort Staunton and navigate through an actual maze of these guys. Now, not all the ones at Fort Staunton have M16s, to my memory, so it isn't as bad, but still, I've lost count of the number of times I've died attempting this section before adopting my current strategy of using Ray Machowski's Bulletproof Patriot. But I should not have to resort to that. There are honestly a lot of missions that I could have mentioned. GTA 3 is brutal, just absolutely brutal, and I went over most of the reasons why in my Game Vault episode on it, so if you haven't seen that, check it out. But all things considered, I do think, at least for GTA 3 specifically, that paramedic side missions take the cake. They aren't mandatory, no, but they are so poorly designed and just an absolute chore to play. Made even more annoying by the fact that actually doing them makes this already very frustrating game a little easier by granting the player infinite sprint. A godsend in a game like this. So, I won't just pick side missions for every game, but for GTA 3, this is the actual worst, hands down. Moving on to my first entry, and one of my favorite games in the series, GTA Vice City. Now, I have a lot more nostalgia for Vice City than I have for 3, but don't get me wrong, it still has plenty of downright bad missions, and the first one I want to nominate is G-Spotlight. This is one of the asset missions for the Interglobal Film Studio on Prawn Island, given to the player by Steve Scott. The premise is simple and very GTA. The studio is having trouble advertising their films, so Tommy is going to make his own advertisement by rigging up a spotlight to do naughty things. In order to do said naughty things though, Tommy, and thus the player, needs to first reach the spotlight. Well, that's simple. Literally fly there with any helicopter. Land on the roof. Spotlight. Done. But no, of course not. Tommy, for whatever reason, and no, I didn't bother to go and check if there's some convoluted reason given in the game as to why Tommy needs to do it this way, but he needs to take a motorcycle and make a series of jumps from rooftop to rooftop in order to pull this off. This whole bit is so gamey. Like in real life, again, helicopters, or way more realistically, break into the building and climb the stairs or even find a service ladder on the outside of the building. Forgiving all of that though, because, well, this is a game, the mission is just super annoying. It's very easy to screw up these jumps, and while there is a checkpoint provided about halfway through when this staircase drops, the whole thing is long and tedious and you will fail many times, unless you've done this before. This also means at some point your bike will probably catch fire, almost certainly at the most inconvenient of times. Not that there are many convenient times for your motorcycle to catch fire while your crotch is still attached, but I digress. Anyways, this mission sucks, plain and simple. Tedious, annoying, unjustifiably gamey in an annoying way. Speaking of very gamey missions, let's look at my next nominee. Bombs Away is one of the missions given to the player by the leader of the Haitian gangs, Auntie Poulet. Now, I dislike pretty much all of Auntie Poulet's missions, and I could have chosen any of them really, but Bombs Away is, I think, at least right now, my least favorite, and a definite contender for Vice City's absolute worst. This mission is a recurring type in the 3D games, an RC vehicle mission. Some of these were plenty of fun, like the one in GTA 3, straight out of GTA 1, which just sees you driving remote control bombs. This one also sees you driving remote control bombs, well, flying, but you're also dropping the bombs, not doing kamikaze, which would be so much easier. You have to use your total of 3 planes to destroy all of the Cuban boats and kill all of the NPCs, including the one guy who flees on foot. The awfulness of this mission comes almost entirely down to just the awful controls. I mean, it isn't that bad, but it's bad enough, and the fact that you only have a rather limited number of planes also makes it exceptionally frustrating. Its one saving grace, perhaps, which might keep it from winning tonight, is the fact that, as an RC mission, when you fail this mission, you at least don't have to do any restocking, and in fact, you're already in a vehicle, which you can just drive right back to Antipulez to restart. So it's probably the easiest mission, maybe in the whole series, to just try again, or at least in the 3D era. Along with this game's other RC mission, which I considered nominating, Demolition Man. That mission is also bad, but I wanted to only pick one RC mission, and well, Demolition Man is mostly just tedious. Not to mention the helicopter controls always seemed more manageable to me than the plane ones. That's just me though. I guarantee some people feel the opposite completely. Anyway, Bombs Away sucks, so does Demo Man. Next. The Chase is a mission given by Ricardo Diaz, and leads directly into another much better mission, which gives you your first taste of Vice City's glorious machine gun. This one, however, is not that mission. In The Chase, you have to first go and, well, chase a guy across a rooftop, which itself is just kinda boring, and it's fairly easy for newbies to get wiped out by his assault rifle or the exploding barrel trap. That's not the worst part of the mission, though. It's what comes immediately afterwards, the actual eponymous chase. The guy jumps off the roof and into a BF injection driven by another NPC. The game then supplies you with an electric scooter to chase the guy, and it's a long, annoying tail mission all the way to Prawn Island. The only real thing you can do here is swerve back and forth a bunch while following these guys, taking care not to get shot or have your tires popped, since the guy continues to fire an assault rifle at you from the back of the car. The mission then ends unceremoniously, and in order to actually continue this plot thread, you need to drive all the way back to Diaz to start Phnom Penh 86, which is, like I said, a much better mission. It makes sense, story-wise, why this happens, and the game explains it, but it is still annoying, and ends up making this mission serve as nothing more than a rather tedious introduction to something much better, which comes after it. Feels like this whole thing could have been skipped, or it could have been merged with the next mission using a different explanation. I'm not sure. As it stands, it sucks. And the winner is G Spotlight. I know I'm probably the outlier here, but there aren't nearly as many bad missions in Vice City for me in comparison to the other two big entries of the original trilogy, so to speak, GTA 3 and San Andreas. There were a few others I considered nominating, honestly all of Antipulez missions, and even the last mission of the Kaufman Cabs asset mission thread, but in the end, G Spotlight takes the cake. There's no other mission I actually dread completing when doing a full run of VC than this one. It's just not any actual fun. The jokes are dated and crass, though I mean, it's Rockstar, but more importantly, the gameplay is just uninspired platformer nonsense, and isn't any fun, not for me anyway. If you love this mission, have at it. It's all yours. I ain't got the time. Let's move on to San Andreas. Alright, so San Andreas. Well, I won't go into the SA rant again here because, honestly, a lot of my issues with San Andreas, as I've said before, come down to the whole thing as a package. A lot of the latter mission's story is kind of convoluted, or perhaps more accurately, doesn't make as much sense as it probably should because of time constraints. But that being said, San Andreas has tons of great missions, thanks to being the third iteration of the 3D universe, and therefore benefiting from plenty of hindsight when it comes to raw gameplay and mission design. But it does still have some real stinkers, such as wrong side of the tracks. Yeah, you know it had to be here. I've said it before, I don't dislike or struggle with this mission anymore, but I most certainly did. There was a time in my life when I probably would have said that I hated this mission, and it does deserve a fair amount of the criticism that it gets, even if I myself no longer find it that difficult. A bad mission isn't necessarily the hardest though, it's just the baddest. But like, in a bad way. This mission, when you don't know all the ins and outs of San Andreas, is a real pain in the ass. It's long, Big Smoke has terrible aim, and the camera just doesn't make it easy to see what's coming. Easily the worst part of the mission though, is a problem that feels quite familiar. Failing this mission usually means driving a long, tedious path back to Big Smoke, especially since most failures of this mission do not involve dying and thus respawning at the hospital, but simply failing when Big Smoke says, "All we had to do..." Yes, I've made that joke so many times, and so has the internet a million times, we know. But that line is infamous for a good reason. We all heard it a ridiculous amount of times, and had it burned into our brains because this mission is kind of horrible. And yes, if you perfectly align yourself, know where all the obstacles are, and also play the definitive edition, you probably won't have very much trouble with this mission. But you still might, and its infamy alone speaks volumes to just how frustrating and tedious it has been for so many people. I absolutely had to bring it up. The next one is bad, not because it's particularly egregious in any way, it's just really boring, and way too simple. The first mission you do for Oglok, Life's a Beach, involves stealing a van of sound equipment for his upcoming record release party. To do this, you head down to a beach party and have to smooth talk your way into the sound van by performing a DDR dance. I could have just as easily put the mission Caesar v El Pondo here, which also sees you doing a simple minigame of a very similar nature, but at least that one gives you a lowrider and has some interesting story, being when Carl meets Caesar. This mission has no consequence, aside from being tangentially related to the mission house party. Nothing actually happens in it, and the only other thing you do after the dance minigame is drive the van to a garage, during which you might be chased by some of the beachgoers. I'm sure this used to happen more often, but hasn't actually happened to me during a playthrough for a long time. But it's not enough to make the mission interesting even when it does happen. So yeah, this mission commits the sin of being too simple and being boring. Our next mission isn't boring though, but it does suck for other reasons. Burning Desire is the first mission given to the player directly by Crash, and involves CJ's first actual instance of covering up for the corrupt trio, not counting them framing him for murder at the beginning of the game. This mission has a number of things working against it. For starters, your first real goal is to set this apartment complex on fire. The problem is, and granted the game does warn you about this, you can very easily set yourself on fire. I mean, very easily. See, to do this, unless for some reason you have a rocket launcher, which you really shouldn't at this point, you have to toss Molotov cocktails into the window of the building. Now, realistically, one should do it, but this also needs to happen quickly, so you have to throw, I think, 4 in order to trigger the next section. While you're doing this, you will also be harassed by some Vagos gang members, who can pretty easily surprise you and kill you if you've already set yourself on fire. You can usually afford to screw up at least 1 throw, but if you screw up 2, you're toast. Burnt toast. This isn't even the worst part of the mission though, and it already sucks. The next section sees you entering the building that you just set on fire to save one of the people inside who is innocent? Look, maybe it is the case that literally everyone else in this building was a violent gangster, but I somehow doubt it. CJ is just very selective about his decision to save Denise here, and it never made sense on a character level, and always felt like the devs wanted to introduce the new girlfriend mechanic organically, which I guess it does do. Kind of. Inside, you have to navigate walls of fire, and locate a fire extinguisher, and then very meticulously and tediously find the girl on the top floor, and work your way back downstairs, putting out fires so she can continue. It's such a silly thing to be doing all of a sudden in a GTA game, and it just feels like one of the many features of San Andreas that's a cool inclusion in concept, but ends up being needless complication to an existing formula that took time away from things that could have otherwise used it. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the fire spreading mechanics in San Andreas, Even having the novelty of a working fire extinguisher in the world would be fine, and even pretty cool, but focusing on it in a mission? In fact, this mechanic is used again in the game's final mission, and it just slows the whole thing down. You might say this mechanic is 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and the mission that introduces it definitely contends for being one of the game's worst. But there is a mission in San Andreas that perhaps is most likely to come to people's minds when thinking of the worst mission. That is, of course, say it with me, supply lines. Now, I debated actually doing air raid here, which I also hate, and in fact, new model army too. Zero's missions are kinda like Anti-Poulet's in Vice City, basically all bad. The whole list could have been just Zero missions, and yes, this has been said before, and yes, I'm sure there are people who do enjoy these missions, but for me, and a lot of people, they are awful, and I hate doing them. I only recently realized, though, they aren't actually necessary for completing the game, so that is at least nice. Supply lines, though, we gotta talk about supply lines. Now, similar to Wrong Side of the Tracks, I don't actually tend to have a ton of trouble completing this mission anymore, and perhaps that's because of version differences, which could very well be the case, but even still, this mission for me, and many people back in the day, and probably still to this day, is just annoying, just awful. Your goal is to fly Zero's RC plane across San Fierro and kill 3 couriers with the plane's machine gun. The couriers can and will fire back at you, and you cannot replace your plane, so that already makes things difficult. The plane controls are also not fantastic, like I said earlier, making the process of actually killing the courier without killing yourself in the process a real pain. Even once you do manage to kill them though, you then have to make a mad dash back to Zero's shop because your plane has a limited supply of fuel. This is really why the mission is so bad. Now, maybe it was patched, maybe I fixed it with a mod and I forgot, maybe the Definitive Edition version changed how slowly the fuel drains, but we all remember this just barely being enough to actually complete the objectives. I'm sure many people watching this can remember multiple times when they killed the 3rd courier and then ran out of fuel literally within sight of Zero's shop. One of the most infuriating things that can happen in a game. Because of this infamy, and the fact that even with a better fuel tank the controls still suck, and the mission is just kinda boring, it may very well be the worst that San Andreas has to offer. But there is another one that probably often comes to people's minds when thinking of the worst mission in San Andreas, NOE. The thing about this mission, while it is boring, just being a flight from one corner of the map to the other, what has made it infamous, and bad in a lot of people's eyes, is something that came down to the game's optimization and or the limitations of the PS2 itself. You see, when flying near Angel Pine, trees would often appear out of nowhere, causing you to die through no fault of your own, and probably stranding you in the middle of Whetstone, where you then had to either reload a save back at the airstrip, or drive all the way back to the top of the map to retry. Today though, playing the DE version or just a modded version with proper draw distance fixes, there's not actually much to say about it. You fly from the airstrip to Angel Pine, fly through a Corona, and then back to the airstrip. That's it. Boring, but not awful. Just kinda there. It came down to a tough choice between supply lines and Burning Desire, but ultimately, I went with the Crash mission. As bad as supply lines is, it has seemed to get easier with time, whether through patches or hindsight, so when I play I just end up listening to the radio and flying around, which isn't a bad time. Burning Desire, on the other hand, has always been bad, and continues to be bad, and there's no part of it that I actually enjoy doing at all. Throwing the Molotovs is annoying, and the whole sequence inside is something that I just can't wait to be done with. The final thing though was that supply lines is optional while Burning Desire is not. So while there are plenty of other options that I could have brought up here, right now at least, this is what I think of when I think of a really bad San Andreas mission. Let's move on to Liberty City Stories. This video and all videos on my channel are brought to you in large part by the wonderful support of my patrons on patreon.com. An extra special thank you to my executive producer tier patrons, Ezra Hambrick, Mason Collin, Chuck K45, and King GTA 15, as well as my Walker Villain tier patron, Michael Vandenberg. Patrons at these tiers also have the option to promote a little bit of their own content, so this video is brought to you by Ezra's Let's Play channel, Scott Games 99, Mason Collins' podcast channel, We're About Everything, and Chuck K45's Upstart Farming channel. I release all videos a little early to patrons, and completely uncensored. I give you any of the original music tracks I've created for a given video, and for extra generous supporters, you can even reserve a slot for your favorite game in my ongoing series, The Game Vault. You'll also get to see your name in the credits of all videos that are produced while you're pledged, get access to a small patron-only Discord where you can easily speak with me or see little behind-the-scenes snippets, and you'll receive my eternal gratitude. Seriously, especially these days, those of you who support my work directly are absolutely incredible, and I can't properly express how grateful I am to you all. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/thecriminalhistorian. Today's mid-video interruption is a little bit longer. Before I go on though, I want to say at the beginning that I am doing just fine. I am finally stable these days from YouTube. I'm not exactly well off, still well below what is apparently the average wage in my country, but I am doing just fine. I am incredibly lucky to even be in a position to make sections like this in a video, or even make videos for a living. I know that. So please, and I really mean this, if you're struggling financially right now, as I did for so many years, do not donate. Go ahead and move on to the rest of the video. I don't want your money. The only people I want to stick around are those with a few extra bucks to spend who really enjoy the content that I make, and who are feeling a little bit generous. If that's not you, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. You are awesome. So, what's actually up? What's with all the preamble? Well, I like to always be transparent when money can be involved, but like I said, I am alright. This isn't quite as desperate as needing help with rent money as it's been in the past. Even if nobody donates because of this, I am going to make it happen. But I'm also not afraid to ask for help. Especially asking the internet for help when it concerns a cat. Because if the internet wasn't designed with the specific purpose of crowdfunding happier lives for kitties, I want to live in a different timeline. Fans of my streams might know my oldest kitty, Link, but back in July of last year, I got a new addition through circumstance. Mr. Joseph Peepers here fell into my care when my neighbor died. Peepers had taken a liking to me, and despite being in a precarious financial situation at that time, I committed to taking him in because of a local organization that helped to pay for him to be fixed, and his very first vet visit. When I took him home to be mine that first time with his medication, I hoped he would be better within a few weeks, as the entire time I'd known him before that, he'd been a sneezy, sniffly, sick boy. Full of love like you wouldn't believe, but perpetually sick. Anyways, he never really got better. He has constantly had a variety of issues, and although I've been able to afford to take him in myself thanks to the channel doing well in the last few months, he has already cost me thousands, and he is still sick. As of last Friday, February 9th, he started to get really sick, and he has been in a rough shape ever since. As of the recording of this script, he is already doing better, but the most recent vet visit that I had to do to get him to this point was really brutal for me. So this has been my exceptionally long-winded way of asking you to help out my little buddy Mr. Peepers. I'm a YouTuber. I don't qualify for any insurance through my employer, and I certainly don't have cat health insurance. I don't even have human health insurance. Point is, vets are ridiculously expensive, and if that weren't the case, I wouldn't be asking. One last time, just in case you decided to listen to this, despite not being in a good financial situation yourself, do not donate if you're struggling. Please. I will make sure Peepers gets the care that he needs, no matter what. But like I said, internet, cats, I felt I would be a terrible parent not to take advantage of this very unique opportunity that I have thanks to my job. If you would like to donate, all links will be in the description down below. You can use PayPal if you want to pay me directly, But if you'd also like to get a few things for yourself through the process, you can sign up on my Patreon, and I believe there's also an option to donate directly through Patreon, but just signing up is also good enough for me. Whether you donate or not though, thank you so very much for listening, and for watching this video. That's really all the support I can ask for at the end of the day, and I am forever grateful to each and every one of my amazing patrons, and everyone who has ever donated directly to the channel. Seriously, you have genuinely helped me. You are awesome. Enjoy the rest of the video. So, something I've realized from doing last week's best list, and now this, is that LCS has some of the best mission balance in the series, I think. I mean, there were a lot of missions that I remembered really enjoying from LCS, and very few that I remembered hating. I actually struggled to find enough nominees here, but there are at least some, mostly side missions, that are certainly boring. In fact, if we included all of LCS's many side missions, it would change the picture quite a bit, but mostly considering only main missions, there aren't a lot of bad ones. Calm Before the Storm, though, is pretty boring, at least the first few sections. This is supposed to be the mission which first introduces the player to what is ostensibly the game's main antagonist, Massimo Torini. The problem is, you barely see Torini during the mission, and all you do at the beginning is follow his helicopter from one location to the next. Now, the mission does become a little bit more interesting when he flees the final location you follow him to, and you're forced to engage with the Triads, but this mission is story-wise a major letdown, and gameplay-wise certainly on the more boring end of the spectrum. Especially for LCS, which I think had a near-perfect mix of the 2D and 3D era vibes. Then again, looking at the list of missions one more time, it occurs to me that while not many missions stick out as awful, and there were lots I remembered fondly, there were also lots of missions in LCS that I just completely forgot about, and I am therefore not even going to talk about, like most of Maria's missions. That on its own probably also says something, so I don't want to paint too rosy a picture for this game. LCS is still very rough around the edges in a lot of ways, being the first handheld 3D era title, unless you count GTA Advance, which in this case, I don't. The mission, though, that I think deserves to take the crown for the worst in LCS, and this is definitely a little bit of a twist, is the game's final mission, the Sicilian Gambit. This mission is so forgettable as a final mission. It's easily the worst finale in the series. I actually had to go and look at my footage of the mission from my GTA biography archives to refresh my memory of what even happens in terms of gameplay in the mission, because all I remembered are the cutscenes after it, which admittedly are fantastic, but that's because Frank Vincent was fantastic, not the final mission. So you first drive to City Hall from Sal's mansion with some Sicilians chasing you, then you drive to the docks and kill a few more Sicilians, and then you're thrown into a long, on-rail shooter section on the water, which is, again, boring and tedious. Finally, you have a small firefight with some Sicilians on the lighthouse island, which is a cool set piece, and then shoot down Torini's helicopter to end the game. Now, on its own, this mission would probably be like pretty middle of the road as a mid-game rising action mission, but that's not what it is. It's the game's final mission, and it's just so completely lame in that regard. It attempts but fails to deliver on spectacle, it has no interesting or unique gameplay, and the antagonist you kill at the end is one that your character has literally not said one word to. You don't even get to in the final scene with him either. Sal does, because really, Torini was Sal's antagonist, but never Tony's, except by proxy. Like I said, the cutscenes at the end of LCS are great, but all the fully animated cutscenes or anything with Frank Vincent in this game is great. The mission, though, it really needed to be so much more than what it was. Because of how disappointing it is, it easily takes the cake for the worst mission in LCS, and honestly, one of the worst missions in the whole series, in my opinion. Vice City's stories, on the other hand, had plenty of missions that jumped to my mind as being awful. I've said it before, and I will say it again, but Vice City Stories has some of the series' best and worst missions by far. Just a crazy mix of good and bad. The first bad one I'm going to nominate is Boomshine Blowout, given to the player by Phil Cassidy. This mission sees you helping Phil to rescue his Boomshine stash from a warehouse that has just been set ablaze by the Cholo gang. The actual mission consists of just one thing: driving a forklift inside this dimly lit warehouse to grab each crate of Boomshine and load it onto the back of Phil's truck. Each time you grab a crate, the configuration of the warehouse changes a little bit because of falling debris, making the path that you have to take back more annoying. Really, what's so bad about this are the awful forklift controls. Now, keep in mind that I am talking about this mission from the perspective of somebody who has never played it on the PSP, the hardware the game was designed for, and therefore the controls it was designed for. This mission sucks even with a better controller, but doing this on a PSP was probably a nightmare, and it just makes it even worse. This mission isn't GTA, it feels like GTA Mario Party. Kinda like Burning Desire from San Andreas actually, but at least this one doesn't introduce the ongoing concept of burning warehouses that you have to navigate with a crappy forklift. Thankfully, the game never does this specifically to you again. It does, however, do plenty of other things I really wish it wouldn't. Such as one of the early missions associated with teaching you about the game's new empire building mechanic, Hose the Hose. The mission sees you grabbing a fire truck to put out one of the player's brothels, which has been set ablaze by one of Marty's cousins. The mission itself is really simple: grab a fire truck, aim water cannon at the building and car, and then kill the arsonist however you like. The problem stems from VCS being really unclear on exactly where it wants you to spray the water to put the fire out. Many times, I have been trying to save the building, only to fail because I wasn't spraying exactly where the game wanted me to. The window here for error is just way too wide. That's pretty much it though, and at the very least, this one isn't too hard to retry, usually, since you will rarely fail it from dying, and Louise's apartment is right around the corner. The next nominee, though, is the first truly egregious one, Jive Drive. This is the mission where we first meet Lance in person, though he pages the player a few times before this. The mission is just a long on-rail shooter from Francis International Airport to about the middle of Little Haiti. The problem here is that it's so easy to die. Your car has limited health, and prioritizing who to shoot to stay alive is always a matter of trial and error. If you manage to beat this mission blind first try, hats off to you. I lost count of the number of times it took me during the playthrough for my GTA biographies, and every subsequent time I've played it, though it has gotten easier, I've never done it on my first attempt. That alone wouldn't be enough to make it awful, but it's long, and it's a major story mission, so replaying it over and over kills the story momentum and just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It only gets worse from here though with the next nominee, Turn On, Tune In, Bug Out, which I always struggle to say or read correctly. This mission sees the player, along with Lance, racing across the city to destroy 3 antennas on each of the major police stations, the one in Washington Beach, the one in Little Havana, and the one downtown. After you destroy the first one though, you gain a rather hefty wanted level, and even if you try to use a pay and spray after that, it will only last for a few seconds before returning to normal, meaning you are forced to bum rush from one police station to the next. You have to be aggressive here, but the NPCs in Vice City Stories are also aggressive. Amongst the most aggressive in the series, in fact, and they can very easily gun you down in a microsecond with stronger tier weapons. This mission is just a gauntlet. It can be completed fairly easily if you're really quick and have the perfect arsenal, but it's one of those missions that you're almost guaranteed to have to do more than once to complete. One thing that saves a lot of VCS's awful missions just a little bit though, is that it was here, finally, that they introduced the ability to buy back your weapons upon death at both hospitals when you are wasted and police stations when you're busted. Early on, this can be quite an expense, but If you put even a little bit of effort into the game's Empire system, you will pretty quickly be rolling in money, and have no problem buying back your weapons anytime you die, and then hopping into the taxi outside to try the mission again. This definitely does help, but that is not an excuse for excessively hard missions that seek to waste the player's time by just forcing them to try over and over again until they get lucky enough to succeed. That's lazy game design, but once again, I'm gonna kill the suspense here because it isn't even a secret. These missions are all bad, but none of them hold a candle, pun intended, to what I consider the worst mission in the entire Grand Theft Auto series by far. Again, spoilers. Light my pyre. This mission is... where do I even begin? It's one of the final missions in the game, akin to something like a dish served cold in GTA 4, or maybe the big score in GTA 5. It's a big one, a major story mission, but as a mission, in terms of its gameplay, there is no competition. So, Lance gets his silver and furnace blown up at the start of this mission, and I just realized it's never explained how or when he gets it back. I guess he buys the same car again. But anyway, in response, furious with anger, he leaps onto the bike that he stole a few missions back and chases after the attackers, who are on their way back to the Mendez brothers' mansion on Prawn Island. So, you have to follow Lance all the way from the very bottom of Ocean Beach to the top of the map and keep him from dying while he throws himself fruitlessly at the bad guys. He's already far enough away when you actually gain control of Victor, and he starts taking damage literally immediately. But if you're insane, you can grab the hidden bike nearby when you spawn in order to shoot forward instead of only from the side. But this is just as dangerous since you can easily shoot Lance, or more likely, crash your bike, forcing you to get back on, which is usually enough time for Lance to either die or take so much damage that you might as well reset. But you can't reset, not really. There is no VCS Definitive Edition, and really no convenient way to play this game at all anymore, except for on original hardware. When you die, yes, it's better than in, say, GTA 3, but it still means buying your weapons back every time, then jumping in a taxi and skipping the cutscenes, and then you're back to playing again. That might not sound like much, but when you have to play a mission a dozen times to complete it, it starts to get old really, really fast. The only way I've been able to consistently beat this mission without losing my mind is by getting my hands on a tank, either by getting 6 stars and stealing one, or just using cheats. Then it is possible to actually stop Lance from dying, but I may be exaggerating a bit. I know, obviously, some people have completed this mission without resorting to a tank, but the fact that I had to, the fact that I even had to consider it, is silly. Hard missions are not on their own a bad thing, but this mission is so unjustifiably hard and out of nowhere. It doesn't feel like the game earned this level of difficulty, nor does it feel like this is a fair challenge in any way whatsoever. When you finally do manage to keep Lance alive all the way to Prawn Island, you're not done, by the way. You then have a very difficult fight just to get inside, with almost all the baddies here packing full assault rifles. And inside you have, actually, an okay boss fight. The fight with Armando is probably the only decent thing about this mission, but even then, it's actually not good. It's just not awful. But it still can be. Armando has a flamethrower, and if you don't know that going in, he can very easily burn you to a crisp. If you do know that, though, you can easily gun him down almost immediately, so... Actually, no, this part sucks too. It either blindsides you with an unfair death after fighting through so much bullcrap, or gives you a super unsatisfying boss fight when Armando dies in like 2 seconds. The whole mission is just frustration, annoyance, anger, and then to slap you in the face. All of that work you just did, that absolute gauntlet you fought through to save Lance and ultimately Louise, and she still dies. One of, if not the saddest scene in all of Grand Theft Auto, for me, follows the series' all-time worst mission. It's a gut punch followed up with a kick to the groin. Granted, this groin kick is also some of the series' best voice acting, in my opinion, It's good dramatic storytelling, but god damn, this mission is just exhausting.
We did have something special.
Make sure Mary Jo takes care of my baby.
Louise. Louise.
Hey, Vic, I know you cared about her, man. But she wasn't right for you. Vic. Hey, Vic. Family's what matters. Oh, damn. All right. Okay, I'm gonna make it. I can make it. I know I can, man.
Now, by the time we get to the HD era, the mission design is a lot better in general. Even when missions are dead simple, they are often entertaining because of the world alone. Because of that, though, the bar has been raised, and thus some of those more boring or simple missions will have to be considered. There's not really anything in GTA 4, though, that I dread like a Light My Pyre, Burning Desire, or Sicilian Gambit. What it has instead are missions like Dust Off, with long sections of the mission that are tedious filler. This mission, given to the player by the United Liberty Paper Contact, whom we all eventually just called ULP, which I always thought was really dumb, but I digress, has 3 parts. 1. Follow a helicopter. 2. Take out the guards around it when it lands to commandeer the helicopter yourself. And 3. Return the heli to the United Liberty Paper Building. The second objective is fine because you get to engage in GTA 4's combat system, which is usually a joy, but the first and last parts of the mission are just there to pad things out. Following the helicopter offers nothing interesting, and flying it back is, well, just flying it back. Continuing in that more boring mission vein, we have Photo Shoot next, given by Playboy X. This mission's purpose is to introduce the player to a new phone, now capable of taking photos, which will very occasionally come up as a mechanic during other missions. So all you do here is drive to a basketball court and wait for a photo to be sent by Playboy X. Once you identify which guy you're meant to kill, you kill him, and that's it. Again, this isn't bad really, it's just not very interesting, by the standards of other missions in this game. It does serve a clear purpose though, and while I find the camera phone to be kind of dumb and a bit of an unnecessary inclusion, I don't think it reaches the level of, say, fire extinguishing in San Andreas. My next nominee is the same thing. Have a Heart is a mission which simply sees you drive from point A to point B, and usually, that is literally it. The mission's context is that you have to drive the corpses of Manny Escuela and his cameraman to a black market doctor, who will sell their organs for profit. Now, the game warns you, and I do seem to remember it being possible, that the trunk of your car can open, which will open you up to a police chase should any passing police see inside. If and when the cops do get involved, it can become more interesting, but as it stands, it usually isn't. The last one I could even think of as a nominee really exemplifies that simple quality that I mentioned earlier, and the camera phone feature. Ransom is a mission, technically, which simply asks the player to walk upstairs to Gracie Ancelotti and take a photo of her for the ransom. That's it though. I almost don't like including this one because it's barely even a mission, but if we're being technical about it, it counts, and is painfully simple. It isn't boring though because it doesn't even last long enough to do so, and it doesn't even really feel like a mission. More like you're just continuing the plan already set in motion from another mission. It was ultimately hard to pick a winner for GTA 4 because it just doesn't have any really bad missions for me, but in the end, I went with Dust Off simply because of how boring it is for how long it is. Yes, there's a decent middle section, but it's way too short, and the very annoying tailing section at the beginning is just too much. I ultimately don't have a lot of bad things to say about GTA 4's mission design because, well, it's really, really good. This continues for the Lost and Damned since it's built on the same engine as GTA 4, and so, similarly, the missions that sprung to my mind as bad for it were mostly boring or too simple. The first is too simple. Coming Down is a mission where the player has to rescue Johnny's drug addict girlfriend, Ashley Butler, from some other violent drug addicts. The mission offers absolutely no challenge unless you are just completely unfamiliar with games like this, but seeing as this is a DLC, basically all players will at least be familiar with GTA 4, you would hope, and that means more challenging missions, but this is not one of them. All you do is drive to Ashley's apartment, kill a few baddies armed with very basic weapons, and then find Ashley on a mattress. You drive her home, that's it. Again, nothing particularly awful, just barely a mission. And when considering The Lost and Damned only has 22 missions total, any of them being lame like this is always gonna suck. The next one was mostly annoying and a little boring. End of Chapter sees the player defend against an attack from Brian Jeremy's Splinter faction of the Lost MC. This mission is basically just a short survival, but the thing I remember being most annoying about it was just the biker NPCs. The fight isn't particularly good or bad, it has no interesting set pieces, and there's no particularly interesting cutscenes here. Just a run-of-the-mill little biker fight. Again, not awful, but not great, and not great is by the HD era standards actually awful. But I think Coming Down is a bit worse, don't we all? As it doesn't have a potentially interesting fight to save it. The fight with Brian's faction can at least be fun. It's not amazing, but it can be alright. But the fight against the drug addicts is just meh. Plus, Ashley is just kind of an unpleasant character to deal with, and that's half the point of her. She's meant to be an obstacle for Johnny and kind of a tertiary antagonist because of this. But there's never anything satisfying with Ashley, all you ever get is sadness and bitterness. She isn't the type of antagonist that the player defeats, and the equivalent to that, I guess, is supposed to be the end of Lost and the Damned, when Johnny stops talking to her. But if you know what happens later, it ultimately makes Ashley a more frustrating character to revisit, even if I don't care that much about Johnny Klevitz. For these reasons, her introductory mission takes the cake for the most Lost and the most Damned. Then there's the Ballad of Gay Tony, which, doesn't really have any bad missions? Like, at all? I mean, I guess if I really stretch it, the mission Mama's Boy is a little bit boring, but if you actually like the LC cage fighter mechanics, it probably isn't. I just don't. That's it though. I really struggled to find any of the main missions that I thought were bad. I really think the thing I enjoyed the least in Ballad was the cage fights, but that feels mostly like a personal preference thing. Not something most people don't like because it's bad, just something I find bad because I don't like it. This might be a bit of a cop-out, but yeah. Moving on to GTA 5. Now, unlike GTA 4 or Ballad, GTA 5 does have plenty of missions that I consider outright bad, and that's probably the reason that despite loving GTA 5 and continuing to defend it as great, it still doesn't quite beat GTA 4 overall for me. Actually, the first bad mission that jumps to my mind when it comes to GTA 5 is the very first mission in the game, Prologue. This whole mission, and a lot of missions in GTA 5, and most of my picks for this list, is so painfully scripted. Scripted isn't bad inherently, but if you try to go even a tiny bit off course here, you just instantly fail. GTA 5 frequently reminds you that you're playing a game, a neatly coordinated and interactive movie. Sometimes you just have to do exactly as the director tells you. This wouldn't be nearly as annoying if that had always been GTA, but we're coming off the days of missions like Sayonara Salvatore or Lure, with really open objectives that you can do however you like. By the time of GTA 5, we get the opposite extreme, and all of the prologue railroads you from set piece to set piece. Blow the door open, now rob the vault, now move along the road, but not too far away, now get in the car but don't drive off the road, now turn right but not that right, and so on and so on. A very similar thing happens in the mission Father-Son, where you are meant to chase after Michael's yacht being towed down the freeway. If this was the 3D era, the goal would probably be to catch the truck and maybe give you the cops on the way to make the chase interesting. Then, when you did catch it, you would trigger the cutscene where Michael retrieves Franklin and Jimmy, and the story could continue all the same. Maybe they would even make the truck invincible to prevent the player from destroying it without completely forcing the player to do exactly as told, right down to auto-playing the mission if you press a button. Yes, GTA 5 does this, though not many times, but every time, it's annoying. Perhaps convenient in the moment, but like, come on, oh wow, thanks for literally playing the game for me. Now I don't even have to think, it's like watching a movie. Anyways. My next nominee is Scouting the Port, and honestly, almost any part of the Merryweather heist, in terms of gameplay, could be a contender for the worst mission in GTA 5. The whole Merryweather heist is just kinda messy, kinda lame, and is made so much worse when you don't even get paid for it. The first mission in that thread sees you drive to the docks and then walk a while with Wade before having to do 2 separate minigames, one controlling a dock crane and one controlling a stevedore truck thing. Now, I know some people enjoy this mission. I remember somebody saying they actually liked this part when I mentioned being annoyed by it in the past, and look, that's fine. This is entirely subjective. I just don't usually enjoy the actual gameplay of this mission. I love the dialogue because the dialogue in GTA 5 is almost all fantastic, but that can't be enough to carry every section of the game on its own. I don't have any actual fun moving these crates, and there's not really any actual challenge here unless you're so new to video games that making mistakes like running over important NPCs is a problem. Beyond that though, it's a walking simulator, or I guess a stevedore simulator, and look, I want to steal cars, not highly specialized industrial equipment, unless it's a combine harvester. Wait, did somebody say yoga? I certainly hope not, but this is a mission. Technically speaking, this is one that, again, feels like a movie. I'm sure it is technically possible to actually fail the yoga minigame, but come on, does this actually count as gameplay? Does this actually count as a challenge in any way, shape, or form? This is Wii Fit. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Wii Fit, or that this kind of gameplay can't be inherently fun. Again, I know at least one person in my comments has defended their love for the yoga minigame, and you know what? That's great. You do you. But me, I find this whole thing to be annoying, and I actually hate doing it every single time. A glorified cutscene. Shouldn't be in the game in my opinion. Wasted motion capture, wasted money. Wish it went towards a better heist instead. Oh boy, we're definitely making up for the lack of bad missions in the GTA 4 era here. Next we have Eye in the Sky. Another mission which basically just has you passively participating in a movie. Maybe that's a bit harsh, you do actually have to kinda do something here, but it's so lame and not actually any fun. You spend the entire mission in first-person mode as Trevor inside the police Maverick. You have to watch Franklin actually play the game on the ground and do the part of the mission that you probably wish you could, and then at the end you are jokingly asked to actually participate again by locating the stolen car using heat signatures. The mission does get more interesting once you gain control of Franklin and get to choose whether you want to spare Child Mulligan or kill him, which does have immediate impact on the gameplay, but everything leading up to this point is so boring. And the winner is Father-Son. It was actually quite a hard pick for me between this and Did Somebody Say Yoga. I think I actually dislike yoga more in the moment, but this mission represents something more detrimental to the mission design of this series than yoga does. There have been silly, short missions before that barely warrant including, like Tony being made in LCS, or missions occasionally being nothing more than a cutscene. But Father-Son is a mission which teases you with what feels like a new kind of GTA freedom, only for you to slowly realize that you do have to do exactly what the game tells you. I mean, in a lot of missions in GTA 5, this one included, every single car on the road is scripted. Every single one. meaning there is way less room for unique playthroughs of this mission. In fact, there aren't usually unique playthroughs of this mission. It goes the same for everyone, and while this isn't the first one in GTA 5 to do that to you, it does that right away, it does feel like the worst for some reason, to me. It's one of the earlier, big missions, or it's set up to be, and is the first instance of seeing two protagonists in the same mission, but on the same side. But they don't do anything interesting with that. You aren't, say, given control of Franklin on the boat, or, like I said earlier, allowed to actually catch the boat your own way. It's a movie scene, and if you didn't practice your part, you're gonna fail, but don't worry, the director will let you just keep trying over and over again until you get it. As for the worst mission in the series, do I even need to say it again? It's Light My Empire. Of course it's Light My Empire. Honestly, I don't even think there's a fair competition. As I said before, VCS has some of the series' best missions, but it also has its worst. Not even just has some of its worst, but straight up, it has the series' worst missions. If it wasn't for Light My Empire, it might have been Turn In, Tune In, Bug Out, or Jive Drive, or hell, a lot of things. The only other real contenders outside of that game would maybe be Sicilian Gambit from LCS, or the paramedic missions in GTA 3. But I don't think they can hold a candle, pun once again intended, to Light My Empire. It just doesn't get any worse than this for me. That is, unless we had included the 2D era games, but perhaps another time. For now, I want to thank you so much for watching this video, and if you're new to my channel, consider checking out the series which started everything, GTA Biographies, or my ongoing attempt to eventually branch off from Grand Theft Auto, as well as that's going, with The Game Vault. I am the Criminal Historian, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, it would be very much appreciated if you took the time to subscribe and like the video. Until next time, have yourself a wonderful evening.